Okay, yeah, I've been recording.
Okay, let's go.
Hey everyone, this is Trey from Steinke Recorded Radio Show, and once again, I am joined with John O'Malley, and we're going to be discussing Chapter 3 of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The title of Chapter 3 is, He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. And today, actually, John O'Malley is going to be pretty much taking over for this chapter.
Well, Trey, thanks for the opportunity to join you again. I've been enjoying these that we've had. I encourage those who've been listening to go back and catch the previous episodes. You'll find them on the Facebook page, and you can scroll back up. There's a link to purchase the book as well. I encourage you to do that. But I think I want to go back for just a second and touch on something. The name of the book is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is a classic book, and it has really stood the test of time. Almost 100 years ago, the book was written. And I thought what we ought to do is probably just go back and take one thought from the preface of the book, and that was that there was a survey that was done and asked people what was the most important thing on their mind. Health was the first thing, but the second was this. They wanted to understand how to get along with people, how to make people like you, and how to win others to your ways of thinking. And this is what Dale Carnegie got onto as he began to develop these lectures to speak with people about this. And so that was kind of the impetus behind the book to say, how do you do this? Rockefeller even said, you know, this is such a precious thing to learn how to do. And so here we are trying to figure out how to help people and benefit them, not just because it's not. We know it's not a selfish thing at all. And even when we're taking a look at this, we say, well, why would we want to influence people? Why would we want to win friends? Well, maybe we're trying to get them to persuade them to buy a product or even our ideas. Mm-hmm. Maybe we want to influence them to change their way of thinking. Maybe we're trying to promote a corporate value or idea. And it's not necessarily about manipulation. Trey and I have talked about this off camera. And the idea is this, is that it's not about a selfish, greedy thing to say, well, I want somebody to think of this, think of just my way or mind control type thing. This is just simply saying that if I can learn how to better people, and that's really what the book is about. So Trey, do you remember the first point or the first principle in this section of the book? Because the section of the book we're in right now is called The Fundamental Techniques in Handling People. We're on today we start the third one. Do you remember what the first one was?
Like the title of the chapter?
Yeah, not the title of the chapter, but the actual principle.
Oh,
it's on the
principle.
Post-it note behind your head.
Yes, I think I actually took that down. But
Trey,
don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
What did that chapter mean to you? That because this is one principle of the technique of handling people. What did that mean to you, this idea of don't condemn, criticize, or complain?
So far, I think that was the hardest one to live with. That one really came with me because there are times where I do criticize a lot, I do condemn, and I do complain a lot. And I think that can speak with a whole lot of people because you can really nitpick at things and complain and grumble about just even minute things, let alone big things. And so that right there was a very good first principle to start out the book with.
I agree. And then the next one was honest and sincere appreciation. That was the episode we got to do together. And yes. I was glad for that opportunity, but that's huge. To genuinely thank people for who they are and what they do. It can be life-changing both to the giver and to the receiver as well. Mm-hmm. Well, today we're going to discuss the third fundamental technique in handling people. And that is, the simple principle is arouse in the other person an eager want. Then he started out, and it's kind of like an awkward sounding title, maybe in more current English, but he's talking about a simple phrase that says that what we ought to do is when we're trying to figure out how to handle people, that we need to look at that other person's position and say, what is it that they want? and work from that angle to say, what's going to benefit them? What's going to help them? Instead of thinking about what's going to help me. And he started out with this. Now, Trey, you're not going to really be into this part, but not that I am either, but I do understand it. He talked about going fishing. And fishing is a pastime for some people. It's a hobby for others. For others, it's an active, engaged, activity they do professionally. And I have 2 ponds beside my house, just down the hill from where I am right now. And I watch these guys out my window, and they're out there and they're fishing. And one of the biggest thing about the 2 ponds that are beside our house is there's 2 different kinds of fish in each pond, one in each, that is. And the guys who are fishing in the furthest pond away, it's about a 7-acre sized pond, they have a special kind of bait that they use. If you took the bait from the furthest pond and threw it in the nearest pond, those fish don't like that bait. And vice versa. You'll never catch fish unless you use the bait that appeals to them. And this is huge. This is what he's talking about. Arouse in the other person an eager want. So he used the illustration. He said he liked to have a strawberries and cream dessert. That was what he liked to have. He said, but he would never imagine going fishing with just that. And so he said what he did was he used what fish wanted. And Trey, in the ponds of our lives, there are a lot of people, a lot of fish, and each of them have a want. Mm-hmm. And if I'm trying to promote a corporate value, or I'm trying to have someone change their thinking, I need to understand what they want first. I'll never get to where I would like to see them. Let's say I'm trying to influence someone for the cause of Christ, or I'm influencing someone for a specific need that needs to be accomplished. Just this past week, I practiced one of these traits, and I'm anxious to see what happens, and we'll get into it in just a little bit. But if we want to have people think of what we're talking about, we better understand what the fish in that pond want. Mm-hmm. And I think in this case, this is where we're going. Because again, Trey, you and I agree. This is not about manipulation for our own. This is so we can understand people. We want to win friends. We want to influence people. And no matter what it is, we're not trying to do this to be egomaniacs, but to rather that we're trying to do this for the benefit of others. Did you have anything on that, the idea of well, not so much fishing for you, but any aspect of that before I press into some of the principles?
Not really. I'm actually wanting to see if you get into a story that I've been looking at. So I want you to go. Well,
there's only 6 or 8 stories there, so let's see if we can nail it. If not, then we'll find out that I'm a failure and I don't need to lead the podcast, we need to talk beforehand.
Suspended.
Okay. Well, there were these 2 college students. They were nephews of Andrew Carnegie, and they would not write their mother. They were at Yale, if I remember right. And these students, his nephews, wouldn't write them. She would write them, and he would never write back. And he wagered $100 that he could get them to write him immediately. And so he set out on this quest. He wrote the nephews, he chatted with them about the different things, and he said, please, enclose, please find a $5 bill, and signed the letter, but purposefully never put the $5 in it. Immediately, the 2 college students wrote back, and they said, dear uncle, blah, 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 we didn't get the $5. He demonstrated he could get them to write back if he spoke their language, if he created an eager want in them. So what did he do? They wouldn't write their mother. Mm-hmm. He says, I put a $5 bill in there. Oh, wow, the $5 was all right. And to get the $5. Now, obviously, in today's money, in 1937 money, completely different. But the truth is there. What did you think about that one, Trey?
I liked that little story. I thought it was clever. It was funny.
And well, it resonates with you too. I mean, although you'd prefer more than $5 from an uncle.
Yes. But there are times I do just call mom and dad asking for money. So I understand how those boys feel when they are told they're going to get money and nothing's there. So yeah, I see why they do write back, and pretty timely as well. Go ahead.
No, I'm waiting for you.
This story that I was hoping that you were going to get to was when Carnegie goes to rent a ballroom, but they raise the price for it. Do you want to talk about that story?
Yeah, you take into that a little bit.
Okay, so Carnegie's been doing his sessions in a ballroom at this hotel, and he goes to do his ballroom, but then they send him a letter to say that the price has instead of it was increased about 300% to what he has been paying. I believe that's what he said.
Right.
And so he wanted at first to just demand them to say, I've already been going here. I believe he already paid for it. I don't recall, but he wanted to just tell them, you need to let me have it. You need to put the price back down. And instead of doing that, he made a list of advantages and then disadvantages for that hotel. The advantages for the hotel having raised the price would be that they get more money, and the disadvantages would be that Carnegie wouldn't be there, and that all the people that he has come through with his sessions wouldn't be there as well. And another disadvantage was that it was free, that they wouldn't have this free advertisement that pretty much Carnegie has been providing by going to that hotel specifically. And if they weren't going to allow him to be there for the sessions, then, or the seminars, then he would have to go to another hotel, and that hotel would get the advertisement, and people would be able to see in there. So I thought that was clever, showing that hotel, the advantages of just Carnegie being there was more than the money that they were asking for.
I think it's powerful to realize that he would created in them this eager want, but he took into consideration what they needed. So he started out with, how does this advantage the hotel? How does it disadvantage the hotel? Instead of saying, this hurts me, I'm going to go somewhere else, I'm done with this place, I'm walking out of here. He just simply made that presentation. And then do you remember what happened as a result of that, Trey?
They lowered it, right?
Right, they only increased it by 50% instead of the 300%. And he could have ruined this, but he figured out, what do they want? Well, they want more money, obviously. They raised the price by 300%. And he showed them a greater value to say it's not just the money that you're going to get, but it's the people who would come to your hotel that would never come to your hotel. And it's about the idea of saying, how will they talk about your hotel and how, opulent it is and these things. Well, all of a sudden, then they begin to realize, I need to see the things from the other people's view. And this leads up to the quote that from that section where Henry Ford, do you know who Henry Ford was?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a significant part to his last name there. He said, if there is any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from my own. And that's important for you and I to realize, Trey, in our lives. It's not just, we know what we want. We want this, 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 and this. Mm-hmm. But what is it that the other person wants? And when I turn that around, I think about a wonderful principle from the book of Romans, let each esteem other better than himself. And to say, okay, he's better. What does he need? How can I serve him? How can I help him? And I think it's a great truth for us to learn here. Did you want to say anything more about that? Because I wanted to talk about one of the letters and then something that I recently did.
There was a lot of self-control that goes into this. Just before what Henry Ford says, Carnegie talks about what would have happened if he would have done the natural thing for him to do, the natural human thing, which would have been just to blow up on someone and start arguing and demanding. And he said, what would have happened? An argument would have begun to steam and boil and sputter. And you know how arguments end. Even if I had convinced him that he was wrong, his pride would have made it difficult for him to back down and give in. So he decided not to go with the arguing, and that just hardens people up, and just like what he said, their pride builds up and doesn't let them back down. And so that's where there's a lot of self-control in this principle as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In the marketplace, no matter where you work or what you're doing, you have to realize, we say the customer's always right, but sometimes the customer can be pretty picky and fussy. But
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, we have to realize the customer does have a point of view. And since they're the ones laying the money on the table, let's try to see things from their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with someone who is obstinate at school, or someone who's just not compliant, or they're just not working well together, there's something that they want. You got to figure out what is it that they want. If you're using strawberry ice cream to catch fish, it's not going to happen. So you got to figure out what's the worm that he likes, and let me get him that worm. Let's get him that and figure out what it is. It's an important detail for us to remember.
All right, you wanted to get into a letter. Which letter?
Well, it really doesn't matter. I think I was going to say in general, if there was one letter that spoke to you. But he talked about this truth in taking the other person's position, arousing an eager want in them. And in several of the letters there were, he took a letter and he broke it down phrase by phrase, and how every letter was self-centered. And it's so true. When you write a letter, you're trying to convey what you want. And this is a wonderful practice. I did this, Trey. I had a publisher that I was writing this past few days. And I wanted to offer my services to write for his journal. And so I started to write this letter. And I'm like, okay, I can do this, and I can write this, and I. And I thought, wait a minute, no. I've just finished reading this chapter. And with all these examples of a letter, you would have thought, I'm going to start out this way, but I didn't. And so I went back to his principles. Instead of talking about what I wanted, I studied what that publisher was looking for. And they were looking for writers of a certain theological persuasion who used a certain English version of the Bible, who practiced a certain conservative position in other areas. And so I felt like, you know what? If that's what he's looking for, then let him understand that I hold those same positions, and I do support his cause, and I have written other books. And so therefore, I need to be considered because I'm a fit for him, instead of saying you're a fit for me. Mm-hmm. And so, to just presume. And so several of these letters had to do with how these different companies would write and talk about their advertising firm or their shipping firm, of what they could do. And there's that one guy, the company that was sending their orders late to the dock. And they were trying to get this guy to stop doing that. And so they wrote the letter in such a manner that said, we want to take the best care of you. And if your shipments could end up at this hour of the day, our guys could go home and eat your product at night. And it was just a beautiful picture of exactly how you could do it. Now, I haven't gotten a reply back from the gentleman to whom I wrote my letter, but I'm anxious to see if that worked. Now, if it doesn't work, at least I know I covered it right, and maybe I'm not the fit that I thought I was to write for his journal. And so I think really when it comes down to this, I think if we just start to write, not from what we want, but what does someone else want?
Yeah.
And then just simply state at the end, this is how I might be able to help you accomplish your goals. What letter stood out to you, Trey?
The one from Barbara Anderson. She is a banking employee.
One. Yeah.
Yes, and she
talk about that.
She's moving to Phoenix, Arizona because of health of her son, and she had already taken the Carnegie courses, and so she's using in this letter, Carnegie. As he wrote all these letters, he wrote how they could have fixed this. With this one, he didn't have to fix it because she had already applied the principles that she had learned here. And so she just begins. I like how she begins, actually. I'll read it.
Read it. It's a great letter.
Okay, I'll read the whole letter. She says, "Dear Sir, my 10 years of bank experience should be of interest to a rapidly growing bank like yours. In various capacities in bank operations, with the Bankers Trust Company in New York, leading to my present assignment as branch manager. I have acquired skills in all phases of banking, including depositor relations, credits, loans, and administrations. I will be relocating to Phoenix in May, and I am sure I can contribute to your growth and profit. I will be in Phoenix the week of April 3rd and would appreciate the opportunity to show you how I can help your bank meet its goals. I like that a lot. She put,
Oh, yeah.
she told the company how much benefit it would be to hire her, and she really put a lot of skills under herself, and it wasn't just fluff. It just didn't say, oh, I'm good with people, I can do this and this. She said, oh, I've acquired skills in banking, depositor relations, credits, loans, and administrations. She was a branch manager. There was almost no reason why the bank in Phoenix couldn't hire her.
Right. It was a great letter. She crafted it well. And do you remember what the result of that letter was, what it said?
No, tell me.
She sent it to 12 banks, and 11 of them wanted her to come for a job interview.
That's right, yeah.
That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we do this, maybe we don't write letters like we used to, but nonetheless, in all of our spoken communication, our email communication, and even, dare I say, our text messaging, that we realize the other person has a point of view that is just as valid as yours is. And if you take theirs into consideration, they're more likely to understand what you're trying to convey, because we're not trying to manipulate people. Sometimes we have to sell a product. Other times we're trying to promote a corporate value or idea or even a spiritual truth. Mm-hmm. We have to influence people to think about what they're thinking about, and then think about what we are thinking about, and hopefully influence them the right way. There's a great cultural debate going on in our country right now about same-sex marriages, etc., and recent decisions by the Supreme Court in our land, and it's forced a conversation to take place. And we realize there are two opposing views here. But what if we sat down to that conversation with somebody who had questions, and they assume that if you're against same-sex relationships, that you're going to be this angry, mean person, and then perhaps you have expectations of them. But what if you said, no, let me see it from their point of view. Now we realize that Scripture doesn't change. We know that. And so we have to realize, okay, if I understand from where they're coming, then perhaps I can use the right lure bait instead of using strawberry ice cream, but to use the right bait for the right pond. And this, again, I'm not saying we compromise our message, but there's a point of understanding from where they're coming from. And yet then we take Bible truth and we explain, well, maybe we're not these mean, angry people that you think we are, but that we genuinely love all people. Mm-hmm. When he said, love my neighbor, there's like a whole list of who that neighbor is. And they may come from different sexual persuasions, and they may come from different ethnic backgrounds, and they may come from a different molded values and ideas or perceptions. Yeah. And so what we have to do is say, I love my neighbor. So that's a value that I'm trying to influence people to say, here's a biblical value and how it applies to my life. So it's very real when you think about this. It's not just to say, buy my product. Mm-hmm. It's about, here's a great thought. Here's a Bible truth by which I live. And those were some of the thoughts that I had there. Those letters that he wrote were just that he kind of took apart, and then that last one that he emphasized was a tremendous letter as well. Did you have anything more about those letters that you wanted to discuss?
Not about those letters, but I just want to go back to just a little something that you said when just in nowadays when dealing with this same-sex marriage situation. There are a lot of Christians who have strong beliefs who, when questioned by someone who doesn't believe the same thing, automatically they'll get into an argument or a debate. And that just kind of goes back to one of the first examples that Carnegie gave us, that, that's where kind of a bit of self-control comes into. You can't just go and argue away with someone because, like he said, their pride is going to build up and even if they know that they're wrong, they're not going to admit it. And so using some of the techniques here, I mean, not really giving benefits, but just not going into an argumentative manner.
Right.
And not even just with this situation of gay marriage, but in all situations where our beliefs don't coincide with someone else's beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a little add-on.
Oh, I think it's tremendous. I think that because I don't want this to just be about, okay, the clinical dissection of each chapter, whatever. I want to see it apply. Show me how it applies, because we have an important position to hold when it comes to same-sex relationships and marriages, etc. There are issues that are dividing our country. There are issues that are making make Christianity seem like we're haters, and wow, we're not. I mean, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. That's everybody in it, of every sexual persuasion, of every generation that has ever existed. He loves all men, and so I think that we can help reframe the argument better to say, let me articulate this in a manner that demonstrates to you I understand. I was just listening to a podcast last night, and they were talking about someone who had come out of the homosexual agenda and movement, and in fact themselves former homosexuals. And they talked about that the love language of the homosexual community is acts of service. And this is an important detail to remember, that when we show hospitality, we are demonstrating there's something different about the perceived position that you and I may hold.
Mm-hmm. Something I just see at the end of this chapter, Carnegie says, and maybe this is a good little thing to leave off with, but he says the usual scolding, pleading, coaxing methods have all ended in futility.
It's true. Well, the principle that he was establishing, of course, was to arouse in the other person an eager want. But there was a quote from an attorney called Owen D. Young. He was a noted attorney and a business leader. He said this, and I thought it summarized the chapter maybe even better than the statement of the principle. But he said, people who can put themselves in the place of other people, who can understand the workings of their mind, are people who are successful. And I think this is a great truth for us to understand, is that what we need to do is make sure that we are looking at the other person and saying, what do they need? And let me meet that need. I think about a situation. I was speaking to somebody in business, and they had a situation at work, and they shared the concept of what the problem was. Protecting privacies, obviously, on all sides of this for that person and with whom I was having the conversation. And I said to the person, I said, that's not what they want. What they're fussing about is not what they want. There's another need that's there, and I suggested what that need might be. And the person thought about it and said, you know what, you're exactly right. So sometimes when the fussy things happen, and what you're fussing about really isn't the problem. The problem really is something else. And so when you figure out what someone wants, then you can start to have a conversation. And those are the thoughts that I had on this episode, Trey. Thanks for letting me lead this one. I hope you let me, if I make it and do a good job, maybe you'll let me do it again.
Yeah, I thought it was good. So, this was part 1 of the book, these past 3 chapters. So principle 1 was don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Principle 2 was give honest and sincere appreciation. And principle 3 was arouse in the other person an eager want. Now these next few podcasts are going to be over part 2 of the book, which is entitled 6 Ways to Make People Like You. So this is 6 chapters that we'll be discussing, and we are going to do every other. So I'm going to take control of this next chapter, and then the following chapter will be all his ideas. and thoughts on
Well,
it. So
we're going to call this the odd and even episode. You're odd, I'm even.
Oh, sure. Whatever you say. But no, I enjoyed these first 2 chapters.
Absolutely.
And I could use these 6 ways to make people to like me. So anyways, thank you for joining for this episode. I have my coffee. I just kind of wanted to show it.
Oh, well, then I've already drunk from my coffee. There you go. The official Apple mug.
Oh, I have Mickey Mouse.
I win.
I think it's, I don't know.
Same
That
company.
was a little better. But anyways, it's not.
Check the
Did you
stock
say same
holdings.
company?
Check the stock holdings. Steve Jobs owned the never mind. We won't even get into it. But yes, check the stock holdings.
We're not going to get into
Okay.
that. Okay. Well, hey, thank you for joining on this episode of Steinke Recorded Radio Show. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you tune in for these next few podcasts on how to make people like you. Thank you.